this really is it this time. This really is the big one. This is my top 10 books, okay? My 10 favorite books. They are ranked based on my enjoyment of them and their quality, okay? There is going to be a lot of fantasy elements in here because this is about 50% fantasy channel. So kicking it off at number 10, these are all going to be classics for me, but is A Game of Thrones, the first book in A Song of Ice and Fire. I just really appreciated how well it drew the world, it drew me in. The politics in this are really, really top notch. It does feel like the blurbs have been put on the paperback since. It does feel kind of like ancient Rome in a fantasy setting, and it's just a great introduction into that world of A Song of Ice and Fire. And number 9, I'm going to be super controversial. A book that made the New York Times top 100 and is making my top 10 is a comic book, and that is Watchmen by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. This is just a fantastic comic. The character work in here they're just so three-dimensional. The kind of time split element, the twists, it just is a story that has stuck with me for decades, and one that I always think about is The Watchmen. If you haven't read it, if you're not big into comic books, just try The Watchmen. Try The Watchmen. It's so different. It feels so different to reading other comic books to me. And yeah, I just absolutely love The Watchmen. It's my number 9. At number 8, represented by this copy of Lord of the Rings, is The Return of the King. The final installment in the Lord of the Rings, most people's favorite installment in Lord of the Rings. Just such great baddies, such great heroes in this. I love Sam as the avenging elf. Frodo's journey, obviously, as everyone knows. Aragorn, the king, was returned. Prince Imrahil of Dol Amroth. You've got the mouth of Sauron, and you've got Shelob, and the scenes are just crazy in this novel. Book 3 of Lord of the Rings is my number 8. At my number 7 is James Clavell again. It's Taipan, a book that I actually do believe is better written than Shogun. I just think all those things you love about Shogun, Taipan doesn't deliver all that Japanese culture. What it does deliver is better character work, better plotting, it's better pacing, and therefore just edges out Shogun and makes it in at my number 7. And number 6 is my favourite book from last year, and that's Dune by Frank Herbert. A book that absolutely blew me away. The themes, are just so deep here. In fact, every time I look at the text, I see things I didn't see before. Every time I think about the book, I'm just realising new aspects, new dynamics to it. It's such a abstract sci-fi world. Is it sci-fi? Is it fantasy? Whatever it is very deep literature. I am convinced of that. And a book that I enjoyed supremely, to the point where I actually bought like 3 copies of the book because I just enjoyed it so much. What could out those first 5 books? At number 5, we're in the top 5 now. It's War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This book, I just can't stop thinking about it. I think about this book almost every day. The characters, the turmoil of the author, the way you can see kind of the author reflected in the final chapters of this book, and how you relate to the author and the characters. So many great moments in this book. Obviously, War and Peace is a book of 2 halves, of 2 sides of the coin, but one I enjoyed immensely. I can't believe this is as long as it is, because it just does not feel that way. At number 4, what some people consider the greatest fantasy book written, not for me, it's A Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin. This has probably the greatest set pieces for me in fantasy that I've experienced so far. It certainly has very, very rich characters and a great world to go with it. It is a very long book, but it won't feel like it. It is very much a one more chapter. It's just one more chapter. Some of the things that happen in these chapters are kind of hard to believe. And it's just a crazy roller coaster ride. At number 3 is a book that has been my favourite book of all time, and one that may well become my favourite book of all time, because I feel like these last 3 are fairly interchangeable, and that is 1984 by George Orwell. a book that really took me by surprise as a teenager, one that I have reread since. A book that a lot of people say is very um, relevant today as it was when it was written. Um, Whether it is or not, I just love the world. I love the paranoia. I love being in the head of the protagonist in this novel. I think it's very sharp and well written. I think it should be in more people's top tens probably. But if it's your bag, if that kind of dystopia is your bag, then 1984 I definitely recommend reading. And number two is going to be a big surprise to a lot of people, but it's Clash of Kings by George R.R. Martin. I feel like this for me is, from an enjoyment level, as good as the series got. It has the most characters in play. It has the most politics going. Just because there are more characters alive at this point, there are more pretenders to the throne. We don't know everything about every part of the world or the different peoples yet. So you're still being introduced to a lot of things in A Clash of Kings. I love Beric Dondarrion as like a Robin Hood chasing the mountain. I love, King Robb. I think there's just so many good things to like. It's a very likable novel, A Clash of Kings. I think it was really the pinnacle of A Song of Ice and Fire. What can be better than A Song of Ice and Fire to a fantasy reader? It's Lord of the Rings. It's the Fellowship of the Ring, as being represented here by this lovely copy of Lord of the Rings. Fellowship of the Ring for me is like perfect. It's every time I read it, I get lost, and the quieter, some people say superfluous chapters of the first book in Lord of the Rings are some of my favourites. I enjoy the songs and poems. I enjoy life in the Shire. I enjoy the journey to Bree, changing time, moving house, the little rumours. I enjoy all that stuff just as much as the big points in Lord of the Rings. I feel like Lord of the Rings as a concept does not work without those elements. I think the whole thought of being away from home and what home is such a huge part of Lord of the Rings. I think Fellowship of the Ring is so rereadable. I can always enjoy going back to Fellowship. It makes me almost not want to read Lord of the Rings, just so I can keep reading the Fellowship over and over. Yeah, and that is my number one pick. Obviously, I'm a fantasy fan. Lord of the Rings. I'm going to annoy a lot of people with this, but it is my favourite. Fellowship of the Ring is my number one.